Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Policy War. I am your presiding host for today, Russell. I lead the progressive perspective on this podcast, and I'll let the other co-hosts introduce
I'm
themselves.
Matthew. I'm going to be more of the moderate, slightly left, I'd say, leaning view.
My name is Jordan, and I am a conservative view, and I have religious, social, and financial and policy conservative views.
All right. And Jordan is a new member on this podcast, but he had some of the same goals for this podcast, which is to provide more discussion, civil discussion among multiple political views rather than just blatant arguing and screaming, which is what our political discourse in America has kind of turned into. But for today, we want to talk about a very divisive issue that may cause some extreme arguments among many people. We want to talk about the Seattle and Portland autonomous zones. Some call them CHAZ, some call them CHOP. I don't know. They all start with CH. So what CHAZ stands for is basically the difference between the two is that CHAZ is a Capitol Hill autonomous zone, so Capitol Hill in Seattle, Washington, not DC, of course. And what CHOP stands for is Capitol Hill Occupied Protest. So they changed the name from CHAZ to CHOP to basically say, hey, we're not trying to make our own nation state. So just know throughout this podcast, those words may be interchangeable, but we're still referring to the same area. And what we're really talking about here is a social experiment. We're discussing the implication of the no police or autonomous zones that existed in Portland and Seattle, Washington. And what they were basically lengths of 6-block areas in which protesters would block out police from entering, even during 911 calls, murder, stealing, you name it. Police were very discouraged from entering since nobody wanted police in that area. Some may say this is an experiment in anarchy, while others may say it's just an occupied protest meant to uplift Black voices. This started in Seattle in early June, and it ended in about late end of June, when the mayor basically forced police in without many casualties to occupy the area, because the CHAZ area also included a police station that was under their control, basically. And you have to realize here, it's only 200 people taking over a police station is pretty surprising in instrumental American politics. So I kind of wanted to discuss what this has led to. So the autonomous zone has led to things called co-op, no-cop food stalls, which basically give food to people for free. It's led to a lot of music and poetry and speaking events, obviously led to a lot of freedom, but it's also led to a lot of crime. In the first month, there were 4 shootings reported by New York Times, 4 shootings just in the in the first month, in a population of just 200 people. And there's no real statistic for how much rape, stealing, assault may have occurred. We are not sure. But this movement has also been spread to Portland, who also wanted to copy Seattle, Washington in doing it, and federal troops were deployed in the area. So first I want to ask Matthew Jordan, as Matthew can go first, what was your first opinion of these CHAZ zones? Are they a good thing for the protests in America as a whole?
I personally think that they're a bad thing, to tell you the truth, because you're taking it sounds good on paper to take law enforcement out of the equation. And as you said, during the day, it was peaceful. People were able to give out food. People were able to have a garden. People were able to read poetry, and it was all fun and nice. But then you look at night, what's your security for that? You have individuals that are just armed, roaming the area, and there's no real sense of order. It's kind of law of the jungle. And so I believe it would have been better just to express that using the First Amendment, the rights that they already possessed in public areas already that exist. I mean, people are protesting on the streets. I'm pretty sure if they wanted to, they could protest in parks and other areas without keeping law enforcement out, because what they're doing is not illegal, and obviously the cops have no problem with. It's the violent people that they're more concerned, I'd believe anyway.
What do you think about Jordan?
I usually don't like to just generalize as one thing, whole, bad, or good, but I can get specific. So on the whole idea of art being produced during Soviet Union, there were some of the greatest composers that ever composed some music while Stalin was in power. So, but at the same time, I think that's kind of a counterproductive argument. Like just because there's art being produced doesn't mean that something good came out of it. Now, maybe the music was good or whatever, but I don't know about like if that is the deciding factor if something was good or bad. I think, you didn't say it was, but I think yes, having like in free speech wise, having people protest saying, "Hey, there is like police brutality and all these other things." I do think that depends on what you're protesting if it makes it justified or not. And I have done some research, and you probably have, Matt, as well, on police brutality, and I do not believe it to be a real like a racist police brutality. I do not believe it to exist. So if something is that something doesn't exist, I do not believe it to be justified. And I can back that up. But if you guys want to talk about that, we can talk about that too. But the autonomous zone in the end, yeah, it did fail. It also it was crowded by police, but they started having shootings in the end. A 16-year-old was killed. A 14-year-old was brutally put in condition. It was put into critical condition. So, and I would say in the end, I think we learned a lesson that it's not a good idea to do that. But I don't know. It's still very autonomous to me.
I guess I play devil's advocate a little bit here because I don't support anarchy, and this is pretty much anarchy when you don't have government playing a role in people's lives. You don't have any authoritarian structure determining what people can and can't do, such as murder, steal, sexual assault, things like that. When there's no enforcement, that is anarchy. And while that word is a dirty word in American politics, this is basically what CHAZ /
I didn't mean to put words in your mouth. I'm just it's difficult to not associate you with the articles that you told us to read.
Oh no! I'm just saying this is a topic we should talk about.
Yeah.
And I gave articles to each of you just for basing off the conversation, So I did not write those.
Yeah.
but
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I will say the comment that police brutality isn't racially biased is very surprising to me. I mean, almost shocking. I'm not even comprehending what I just heard in all honesty. But I do have to say, you just have to look at simple numbers. Yeah. You just have to look at simple numbers since this CHAZ shop is about police brutality, which is why they think, oh, just take away the police, problem solved. But that's not a good solution. But still, the problem exists. You just have to look at prison numbers. You will see the most common race in prison is black people. Second is Mexicans. Third is white people. Now, if we look at the American population, African Americans are 13% of the American population. White people are around 60%, above 60%. For some reason, blacks are more than whites in prison. This is obvious example of police targeting of black communities. White people smoke weed. White people do pot. White people steal and murder. It's not like it's exclusive to African Americans, but these are the areas they target. It's not like gangs are exclusive to African Americans or criminal activity exclusive to African Americans. It's not. And police brutality is just a blatant example of police targeting of black communities and black people. I would love to hear what reason do you have to think it's not racially biased?
I'm not saying that there is no racism. There is obviously racism, and let me. I think that what the definition of racism used to be that you would believe that one race is inferior or superior to another, or discrimination based on race. And I think it's turned into if any system results in a racial disparity, that means it has to be racist. That's what the definition has turned into. And with regard to 13% of the population, well, another factor to consider is, well, like for prison populations at least, people get arrested when there's a confrontation of crime. And when it comes to crime statistics, about half of the crime is committed by the African American population. So there already is a disproportionality in that it's more likely for blacks to be arrested in the first place because there is more disproportionate crime rate per capita of race. And also, black crime is a lot more centralized in cities where there is a lot more structured police force that's more effective at doing like it's right next to the crime. And there's yes, there are such things as white gangs, but there's a lot more black gangs in cities. And I'm not trying to be racial scoring. I hate racism. It's logically stupid and incorrect in the immediate, but I just just recently, especially in the media, there's just been a lot of defining the problem, but it's keep on saying the problem over and over and over again. And I would think that if you keep on doing it, then why is no one suggesting a solution? Of course, there are people that are suggesting a solution, but to me, the main narrative hasn't suggested solutions except for don't vote Trump. Like that's
Mac. I'll let you go on this.
Go ahead, Mac. Yeah.
I was going to say three things. So, first thing I was going to say is racism is no longer as overt anymore due to changes we've had since the civil rights era. So you're not going to see any laws in the book against X race explicitly, and some laws may be unintentionally racist. It doesn't mean they were created with the intent to lock up, a certain race or be impacting a certain race, but it can still have the impacts. And so you can still have discrimination based upon race without the intent of doing so. And that's kind of at the stage where we're at now. And then the second thing is poverty. I was going to mention, you may have more crimes committed, but that may be something that's associated with poverty. If you look at the Census Bureau statistics, you have a 20.8% poverty rate in the black community versus an 8.1% rate for non-white Hispanics and around a 10.1% rate for Asian Americans. So there is a complete disparity there. I don't remember the statistic for the Hispanic population, but you can see that there's a problem whenever it comes to income. And one common argument that I really dislike is people are like, well, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's a problem that they have with the community themselves. But if you sit down and you think about it, I'm in my 20s. My father is in his 50s. If you're looking at somebody, a black person in that situation, their parents or maybe their grandparents lived before the end of the civil rights movement when they didn't have most of their rights there. So what are they supposed to stand on? Where's this pull yourself up? Because you're seeing in a situation where they didn't have their full promised rights in practice. On paper they did, but in practice, most of the time they did not, especially in the South. And then you have them living with a parent that's, had that situation, or the parent growing up in that situation. So it takes time. So there needs to be, kind of corrective measures, because the end goal, I'm pretty sure end goal is you want everybody, regardless of whatever demographic they are, to have an equal opportunity. But we're not quite to that point yet. And that also applies with gender, race, sexual orientation, all across the board.
I totally agree.
And I do want to, I just want to say something also. It is poverty and education that play the biggest levels in crime. I think that's apparent. If you don't know how to get out of the area, you're not going to get out of the area. If you don't have the resources to get out of the area, you're not going to get out of the area. Those are some of the two biggest factors, obviously. But even if black people do more crime, even if that's true, and not even accounting for the crime that police not catch, which is an abundance, I'm sure. There can't be a study to show how many crimes police force does not catch. It does not even they can't report that, But if they focus on only black areas, then yes, they can stack up the crime numbers and be like, oh, black people are doing all the crime. Well, that's the areas you're mainly concentrated in. But I do want to say, police brutality, it does. I haven't seen many videos of just white people saying, I can't breathe. I mean, just it's a general culture thing in America where if you're an African American, you have your parents talk to you about this is what you do when a cop pulls you over so you don't get shot. Like, I don't think the average Caucasian has that conversation with their parents.
I do
They
agree.
still have to worry about it. And I mean, I don't think the brutality is a perceived thing that doesn't really exist. It happens all the time. And more than George Floyd, this has been going on since the war on drugs. But so yes, poverty and education play a role in crime, but there's still no need for police to treat African Americans like they have done.
I do agree. Like, for instance, when it comes to police brutality, the factor I'm saying it doesn't exist on is murdering someone as a result of violent crime. For every 10,000 people arrested for violent crime, 3 blacks are killed and 4 whites, for instance. And I'm not saying whites are discriminated more. Those numbers are so small and not much different at all that I would say on that factor there is no disparity. It's not significant enough. But when it comes to, hey, yeah, I like you should like, what was it called? I do think there is disparity in the fact that a lot of African American families have to teach their children that, hey, you're going to have to act this way if a cop pulls you over. I think that is a disparity. I wouldn't call that police brutality because that's the families, but like if it's the police hurting, like arresting based on things that aren't qualified for arrest and stuff like that, you know what I'm saying? When it comes to actual arrest events, that's where you say the police brutality exists. And when it comes to arresting or killing as a result of violent crime, there is none. But that is, again, at the most extreme level. There's still inequality in many other levels. But when it comes to the factor that, like George Floyd, which is murdering the person as a result of an arrest, there is no disparity. But in many other factors.
I do want to say, I do want to say that statistic is very, very minute. There's way more crime than just violent crime. Floyd got murdered for counterfeit bills, which he used at a store, and then got chokeholded. That was not violent crime. That's not counting that statistic. Breonna Taylor was shot in her home for her boyfriend, who they thought was in the house, and there's different sides of how it went, but basically she was murdered at home for a crime they weren't even looking at her for. And it wasn't violent. So I think that statistic is too minute to see all the different cases. Police brutality doesn't have to be murder. It can just be beating somebody close to death. It can be restraining them for no reason. Sandra Bland. I don't know what made her suicide in the cop car that happened years ago, but I'm not really a conspiracy theorist, and I say it. I'm almost certain she didn't kill herself. So there's things like that where you have to consider it's way more than just violent crime and murders. It's constant police berating of African Americans through verbal, physical, and sometimes gunshots. So I think that statistic is a little bit too narrow for the focuses. But I would want to ask you, like, are you saying this protest? Are you saying this protest like all lives matter? Like, what solution do you have to stop all police brutality if you believe it doesn't exist for African Americans?
Now, so like when you want to solve police brutality, it first of all, it's not a simple issue. I think we all understand that. And neither is crime. I mean, there's just so many problems that contribute to both racial disparity and all this police stuff. Like before the civil rights movement, I think the single motherhood rate for Black community was 20%, and now it's upward of the 70s. Like I think I think fatherlessness is a very big problem because if you break the family, you break the future of the kids, and that's why that's one of the main reasons people can't break out of poverty. Also, if you have no models for someone that what I also support is people who have escaped poverty going back and helping the people from the communities that they escaped from. Like that's one not complete solution, but a part of a solution, for instance. And as far as I think something that needs to happen though is that the crime rate needs to drop. If you want this racial disparity to equalize out, the crime rate that needs to be fought. And I think everywhere.
But police brutality, though, it's about police brutality. Like, how do you reduce police brutality? I know it's a complex problem, but what's one policy solution? Or
So
Matthew, if you want to talk about the, you go ahead. But yeah,
so I don't
I'm
think
just
getting rid of them. Yeah, I just don't think so. I think we agree that getting rid of the police is a bad idea. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty sure
Yeah.
we could all agree on that.
Yeah. So I think defund the police is a very inconsistent argument because, well, one, everywhere that has been done, crime is shot straight up.
Well,
So
I get what you dislike, but what do you like? Like,
I'm getting to that.
I always get what
Yeah. So reform, like I obviously support police reform, and making sure that I think body cams, yes, even if it costs a lot of money, holding a police officer accountable to not do racist stuff. Because I like with how Matt said about racism today is a lot different than it was a long time ago. Nowadays, there is a sufficient backlash to get you justified for the actions that were done against you, if they were racist actions. Back then, you had no community of help to fight against the person that you were wronged by, but now you do. And with racist cops, what we should do is hold them more accountable. And there are racist cops out there. We need to be holding them more accountable with funding the police and more training to make sure that they don't enter the police force if they're racist. And that requires more funding. So that's one thing. Also, I do think increasing the police presence in areas where there's high crime is very effective. It's an unpopular opinion, but in order for crime to stop, you have to have a negative incentive and a positive incentive. And the negative incentive is increasing the police. The positive incentive is improving education, making sure that the family of the Black community is restored. I think that welfare is a not very good policy. What it does is it's easier for the mother to live without the father, financially speaking, which I think is absolutely reprehensible. And that's one of the main contributors to why the Black family has broken down. I think that policy needs to stop.
Well, I do want to see what I guess a less conservative, less liberal opinion of this is with Matthew, and what do you think solution is for reducing police brutality amongst everybody, not just.
So I would say that you do have a few bad apples out there. I think one of the main problems, though, is you have these people that get in trouble at one precinct and they show signs and they switch to another precinct, and then they finally do something that's so horrendous that they're caught, and it's just like this boiling over point. And then there's some things that you could also do along the side to reduce the possibilities of that happening. So, for example, the police should not be like a military force. There's no reason why they should be trained by the military, and there's no reason why they should possess any military vehicles or anything closely resembling assault weapons. That's something that should be dealt with at the federal level, not the local level, maybe not even metropolitan police. I understand that you may have some operations that are like that. You may have something like that in, large cities like Austin or Chicago or Portland, where you have these complex operations where you will be outgunned, where that may present a problem later on down the line. But your average beat cop should not be expecting to come across that. So maybe looking into psychiatric testing, making sure that, their mental well-being is there because it's a stressful job, making sure that they don't use any of the chokeholds, because one of the big problems is people tend to associate I can't breathe with, oh, well, you can speak, therefore you can breathe. I was actually talking to a forensic pathologist. I tend to shadow a few of them on my time off, and one of them created a PowerPoint regarding this. The problem is that you can still have air hunger and still be suffocating when you say that. I mean, you think of an asthma patient, I can't breathe. You think of somebody that's going into congestive heart failure, they say, I can't breathe. And then there's also a story he told me about an individual, about a physician that was undergoing his own operation. He was just watching himself being operated upon. And they did an epidural on him. And so he was essentially, numbed and just watching. And he was telling him, I'm having trouble breathing. And the anesthesiologist is like, that's BS. You'll be fine in operation. And he ended up eventually passing out. And they found out that the anesthetic affected his nerves And so he was actually having trouble breathing, like his diaphragm, wasn't contracting. So he wasn't really breathing. And so they had to bag him. They basically had to bag manual breathing for him till the end of the operation. Now, luckily he survived, but it's one of those things where whenever you have somebody contained, you don't need to, continue with the force or anything like that. If they're unarmed, there's no big problem there. There's no point in risking their potential life just to try to subdue them faster, because they're going to panic when they can't breathe. Whenever they're in a hold like that, they're going to panic, and you can never really pull off these holds when they're panicking, because you're hoping to cut the blood supply for a short period of time or hit the trach to make them pass out, but that makes it worse. So avoiding things like that, incentivizing that. So
right. Trump did. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I do agree. I think something you mentioned at the very beginning, but didn't get much into detail, was the idea where some police move to a different department and then they do something bad there. I also agree that there needs to be a new organization that keeps that from happening. Third-party
investigations would be a wonderful thing.
Yes.
I mean, that's what should happen whenever something within the department, anything within the department, the second you have something involving an officer killing someone or potentially killing someone, a third party should automatically investigate it, because number one, you don't get the police involved with that. So you have innocence throughout, no potential buddy type stuff. And number two, it just provides a more clean look into that. Like no bias, no worry of bias. Everybody kind of has a clear mind.
I agree with that. Floyd, as the most recent example, he had a dozen complaints, and every police officer gets complaints, obviously, but a dozen of these were reprimanded at him by his police chief. So his police chief saw credibility in those complaints and then said he did whatever he did. He probably just said, hey, don't do this, or hey, be a little bit more careful in the future. It obviously wasn't anything severe. So I think along with not being able to easily transfer departments across the United States, I think there should be a more strict rule on police complaints that are basically met with reprimand by the police chief if the police chief realizes they're credible, like, hey, you're abusing your power in this situation. I think there should be a limit. We could do the arbitrary 3 strikes and you're out rule that they apply to criminals, which I kind of despise. They base it off of baseball instead of actual research. It's Americans, the best people in the world, right? But I would be much better with like a 4 to 5 complaints, especially in a year or 2 year time span. If you're getting multiple complaints about abuses of power and your police chief is realizing, oh, this is a really bad apple, you can cut the bad apple before it's done. This can either be a suspension or just exposed in front of the police force. Like the people who abuse power, they abuse it multiple times. It wasn't the first time Floyd beat somebody up. He had a complaint of beating multiple individuals beforehand, and it was a complaint. It's just not something that comes out of the blue. These are repeated offenses, and I think if we take steps to cut them off, say it, whatever the number is, 4, 5, 6 in a 2 year span, they should be removed from their privilege as a police officer and basically fired and not allowed to work anywhere. I think that's a reasonable, because police officers are let off pretty easily for offenses. I mean,
I think
so.
Also, like with the legitimateness of complaints, they need to show how the police officer violated the conduct of the police department. I think like that is the most credible complaint or accusation you can get, and it'll obviously make the department listen a lot more closely. Complaints.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because I mean, Matthew mentioned that thing about chokeholds. Trump signed an executive order to calm down protesters, which really didn't work. All it did was rile them up. In which he basically banned chokeholds. I'm sorry, people who can't see. I'm using big quotation marks. Just imagine them in your mind. Ban chokeholds only unless your life is at risk. So if your life is at risk, you can use a chokehold. And now it's basically the policy beforehand. So as long as everybody can argue, I felt threatened, he was yelling at me, or, oh, I thought his phone was a gun, which is a recent murder case, by the way, a police officer said they thought an individual's phone was a gun. It's just absurd to me. Like, training needs to be improved. They need to have stricter complaint enforcement among police officers. And I think this goes beyond chokeholds. Way beyond chokeholds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think. Oh, you can go ahead and say final word.
I think, the other side of this coin is that I do think that good cops need to be appreciated more because, again, like they do have a very hard job. They have to go. A lot of them have to go through the idea of not seeing their family ever again every day, and a lot of them get PTSD on the job. Often they do get let go. I think for like 3 days if they do have an incident, but it's still a very short amount of time. I do think that again, the other side of this coin is definitely appreciating the ones who do their job right. So,
well, I think if you look at it on both sides, you're gonna have people who are really extreme that ignore. Well, both of them are extreme, but the one side you're gonna have, the one side you just mentioned, you're gonna have the people who are just like, okay, you know, it's a few people. There's nothing you really need to change at all. You know, look, we prosecuted the officer who knelt on his neck, and the 3 other officers who stood by there. Problem solved. And those people, you know, they're not going to see the whole systemic issue where other things could be improved. And on the other side, you're going to have, you know, these people that think, oh, all cops are bastards, they're bad, you know, it's a hive mind collective where, you know, if they're a police officer, they're automatic, you know, racist, they're brutal, blah, 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 the type that automatically pull their phone out and antagonize and all that type of stuff. So I think the middle ground is just, you know, understanding that they have a difficult job and trying to kind of lower the tension that happens whenever these stops are made, to try to reduce it, to try to have more investigation so there's not people jumping to one of the two sides.
I definitely agree with that. I think what a lot of BLM people want is obviously more regulation among police force to make sure they don't abuse their power. I don't think a revolutionary way like an autonomous zone or no police zone is the way to accomplish that. I think it's going to be something a little bit less of a spectacle and just a change in police department policy about how they carry out their actions. So
I'll just straight up say what Berkeley's planning on doing with having private citizens do traffic stops is just probably one of the stupidest things ever. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen like live PD where sometimes, you know, they pull someone over for a traffic stop, and they have like drugs and they may have like a firearm. Do you think that like any one of us would pull someone over, feel comfortable saying, you know, you're gonna get a ticket, or, you know, you're going a bit fast there and not get blown?
I'm 21. Imagine if this 40, 50-year-old guy is in the car. He's like, oh, I just got out of the military, you little kid. What are you doing pulling up to my car? He's like, sir, do you have a gun license? Like, yeah, I do. You want to fucking see it? And I'm like, no, sir. No, I do not. No, sir.
Well, I think something to take away from this is like, well, back to CHAZ and CHOP, they did have their own like police force. Like it wasn't actually police.
Yeah.
It was
volunteer. Yeah, it was civilian. Civilian.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, so I do think that it is at least not. It's kind of like natural law that you have a police force in order to have order. And I think, but the question is, how high quality and how functioning can they be according to the conduct that they're founded upon? And obviously, the police can be more effective at the job than just a random autonomous zone that showed up with no one, you know, and they're trained with money. Like, and I'm not as much dissing CHOP as I am just trying to say, yeah, we need to make sure that it's higher quality training so that people are better at their job. And I think we can all agree there.
Yeah, right. I think we all agree. Yeah. I think we all agree that anarchy is a bad thing, which is a great step in relationships between ideologies. But I think we're going to wrap up the episode at that. Don't revolt against the government, kids. And that will be our episode for today. I'm Marcel. He's Matthew. You're Matthew. I think
signing off.
All right. Thank you for listening.
See you next time.